You're about to see something truly rare. It's when someone tied firmly to the left finally starts to throw off their shackles and let their mind explore the truth beyond it. That's exactly what describes Ana Kasparian's slow pivot away from what's become of the modern left, as well as the massive gap in trust in the mainstream media over a multitude of vital stories in the last few years. Now, while I do think Ana Kasparian is pretty late at catching up to the media's tricks, she did mention some particular examples of the MSM's lies that I want to explore, so take a look at this before I tell you more about it.
When I look at the stories that I got wrong during the era, right, and mostly culture war related stories, it's because the media intentionally, and I'm going to say intentionally, omitted incredibly important details of those various controversial stories. The Kyle Rittenhouse story, perfect example of that. I got that story wrong because I relied on corporate media. But if you are relying on one news source, or if you are under the impression that the media outlets that have been around forever are the most credible, the most legitimate, and the most accurate, you will be misled. You really do have to have a healthy, diverse media diet in order to get a better grasp on what's happening in the country and in the world.
Sounds like a different person, doesn't she? Now consider the fact that she's just coming off one of the most solidly left-wing news outlets in digital media, being the Young Turks, and Ana Kasparian has probably realized that she's been part of the same political bubbles that she's been accusing the political right of. But while it's certainly a welcome change for her to finally admit it, there's still a problem. It's that it may be too little too late. If you've been observing the changing trends in the media over the last 8 years, in particular with the rise of Donald Trump, you realize that public trust in the media has almost been a tennis match between supporters of one party or the other. For example, here's a Pew Research poll from the ending of the last presidency showing how 2/3 of Democrat voters report the highest trust in CNN, while nearly 2/3 of Republicans report similar great trust in Fox News. You see the problem? Those news channels created a bubble around their target audience and fed them what they wanted to hear to profit off of them. And when that's the case for most Americans, it's hard to blame them for believing whatever their media echo chambers say. But at the same time, it's also hard to let people in that media just go scot-free because they spiral that political polarization out of control despite being one of the only people to be able to do something about it. Ana Kasparian brought up the Kyle Rittenhouse case, and it's certainly interesting when you look at it how sure she sounds of herself in one of her older clips, talking about it despite now admitting that she hadn't done enough research on the incident and case herself. Take a look at the clip from over 3 years ago that serves as an interesting case study for this exact point.
It's one thing to take a comment or a statement from Kyle Rittenhouse. He's going to want to defend what he engaged in. But I do think it's important for these media outlets to be incredibly clear about what he did wrong. It's not like he was in his front yard and he was approached by a group of individuals who posed an imminent threat to his life. He drove across state lines with his family, intending to go to this protest armed with a gun that he did not have, was not legally in possession of. He opened fire, and as protesters were chasing him to get a hold of his gun so he didn't hurt anyone else, he opened fire again, injuring one more person and killing another person. As the greatest domestic threat that we're facing right now, and that's right-wing extremists. The FBI has said that in multiple reports. And that's what Kyle Rittenhouse and all of his enablers are.
Really? Is that how the entire saga played out? You don't have to like or agree with what Kyle did to be able to recognize that there's more to the story. And the fact that she twisted the narrative to such a degree to just stop short of calling him a terrorist tells you exactly how hollow the media's accusations can really be when you scratch the surface. And it's incidents like that and George Floyd one back in 2020 that serve to reveal how we're truly living in a post-truth society. It's a society where the objective facts matter less than who can rile up the most emotions and get the highest response. And it's made me even more convenient for the media when they don't even have to make up an elaborate lie in the first place. Lies by omission can be just as effective because they portray a twisted picture of the truth and make people act out in even more twisted ways. In the case of Ana Kasparian herself, she's at least become self-aware enough to recognize that, and she brought up one of the most interesting subject matters around it, being the Robert Mueller report on Donald Trump's supposed Russia collusion.
I think that all of those mistakes add up in people's minds and it leads to distrust. So look, I'll give you an example that I think you guys are probably definitely going to agree with, but then I'll also talk about it in the context of some of the stories that I got wrong because I relied on legacy media. So in the lead up to the Mueller report, if you were consuming the New York Times, NBC, if legacy media was what you relied on for your information, you were under the impression that without question, the Mueller report will prove that Donald Trump had colluded. There was a big conspiracy between Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, and Russia. The report did not bear that out. And it was I just felt like I was misled by a lot of that reporting. I felt like a sucker for buying that reporting. So that already was like a major hit when it came to my trust in corporate media or legacy media.
And guess what? Places like MSNBC were at the forefront of peddling these partisan theories to feed their audience, with Rachel Maddow practically dedicating days worth of coverage to finding that smoking gun and a link from Donald Trump to Russia. The Guardian earlier even asked if Rachel Maddow would face a reckoning for her coverage on that story, instead of just having it die down and fade out of the public consciousness to her own convenience. Now, of course, Rachel wasn't alone in this, but it's only Ana Kasparian so far that has been bold enough to admit that she got played by the media, and that alone takes a certain level of intellectual grit and humility.
Well, I think that the polarization that we're experiencing with the American electorate is reflected in how the media conducts itself. I think depending on what you're watching, you will get only half of the story. So I think that's definitely true of some of the more new media outlets, independent outlets. They cater to a very specific portion of the audience, very specific portion of the electorate. And I think Americans are increasingly realizing, okay, I might be in an ideological bubble depending on what kind of news I'm consuming.
I think that goes into overdrive when you're speaking about the digital media platforms rather than just the traditional mainstream media. Think about it. These social media companies and corporate giants never set out to be the platform of people's political consciousness to reside in. After all, they're just money-making machines and private entities that aren't beholden to people other than their shareholders. That means the mighty algorithms that rule our digital lives are inadvertently putting us into a cage of our own making. As these companies try to keep us on their platforms as long as they can, they're not meant to give you news in the truest sense, one that makes you feel uncomfortable or introduces a degree of cognitive dissonance at hearing something that contradicts what you believe. They learn your patterns of behavior and thought and double down on them as much as they can. I think that's why it has never been more important than it is now for people to branch out and diversify the kind of media they consume. Actively seek out people you vehemently disagree with and see how they're able to come to wildly different conclusions than yourself, and don't do that for any reason other than for yourself. Because it's ultimately only you who stands to gain or lose from having your mind shut off to one side of the political aisle. No rich politician or owner of a corporation cares if you believe something's wrong and stupid, but you should. That's why I think even though that Ana Kasparian said that she may be too late in some regard, it sets a good precedent for others to follow. In the end, it only results if you get more bipartisan respect, even if you're not able to get bipartisan agreement.